Hey, it's Tim Ditloff, and I'm with Full Sail Leadership Academy. Welcome to the Quorum Leadership Podcast. Today, our guest is Captain John Doolittle. John is an Air Force grad, and he did a cross-service transfer and became an ensign in the United States Navy. He served initially as a hard hat diver and then applied to BUDS, the Navy SEAL training. He was turned down 6 times and finally got to go through the training and became a Navy SEAL. John spent 25 years in the Navy and retired at the rank of captain. After the Navy, he joined KAATSU, a global company that works in the patented blood flow restriction exercise equipment. So, John, you're going to have to really explain that one to me because I'm at a loss. And even my PhD son that has a doctorate in physiology, he's like, I don't get what that is. So you're going to have to really inform us about that. But in addition to John's amazing work at KAATSU and his speaking, John is very active in the UDT SEAL Foundation, and he donates all of his speaking fees to that cause. And he's highly involved in the Tampa Bay Frogman Swim that's held in January. It benefits the Navy SEAL Foundation and his brothers that are still in the SEAL team. So, John, so many questions, but I have to tell you, the one that was really grating at my mind last Saturday, as I was watching the Air Force Academy play, your college alma mater, playing the United States Navy, your service alma mater. Who were you rooting for?
Air Force Academy, all the way, man. That's where I went to school. Okay. That's my college, alma mater. That's who I root for. Even though I did 25 years in the Navy, I root for Air Force, man. A lot of my buddies that went to Navy, they call me a traitor, but hey, that's okay.
Yeah. So tell us about KAATSU. What is blood flow restriction exercise equipment, and how did you get involved in KAATSU?
Well, first of all, Tim, thanks for having me on your show, your podcast. Is this a video cast as well, or is it only audio?
It is video, and it will go out as audio as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I can actually show you KAATSU later on in this episode if you want, but in very, very basic terms, you have these elastic pneumatic bands that go high on your arms or high on your legs, and you have this device that they're not tourniquets, although they kind of look like tourniquets. What they don't cut off blood flow. What they do is they slow the venous return. So I had 13 surgeries while I was in the SEAL teams, orthopedic surgeries. The last 2, the guys used this for my rehab, the PT. So what happens is during the pressure phase, everything in the limb feels engorged or full of blood because you'll see all your veins will kind of stick out and you're engorging or you're dilating all that tissue that's in the limb. And then when you start moving multi-joint movements while you're wearing that, it feels much harder than it actually is. And your body reacts to that from a metabolic and hormonal response perspective. It reacts to that as if you're doing heavy exercise or moving heavy weights. So that's why the PTs like it. That's why pro sports, Olympic sport, a lot of athletes and trainers and PTs use it, because after an injury, you don't want that person loading the skeletal system. You want them to get metabolic outcomes, but you don't want them to load the skeletal system. It's a great tool for that. That's how I was introduced to it. I fell in love with it. Went out to Tokyo, met Dr. Sato, brought my family out there, got some training, and I never looked back. That was, that was like 6.5 years ago. Yeah, but great company.
Yeah, I think your LinkedIn page says you were started there in 2017. So that was like right after you got out of the SEAL teams, right?
Yeah, immediately. They have this thing in the military where you go on, quote, terminal leave. And during that terminal leave, it's kind of a time to find, do job hunting, do interviews, that kind of stuff. But I essentially had done that before I ever got out. I knew KAATSU was what I wanted to do. So I spent a lot of that time learning about this modality of rehab and treatment and performance enhancement. helps with a lot of older folks. Our oldest patient has been 104 years old. And the whole reason this stuff got started in Japan was about the elderly and something known as sarcopenia or muscle wasting. And, the idea of becoming more frail as you get older. And what Dr. Sato proved was that you can actually build muscle without heavy resistance training. You can actually build muscle as you age. And I know you have a lot of other topics you want to hit, but I got to show you this picture. So this is during COVID. This is Dr. Sato on his 75th birthday.
Wow.
And he doesn't lift weights. Instead of adding weight, he adds pressure.
Wow.
And again, they're elastic pneumatic bands. But at 75, he's now it's like 76, 77. It's pretty incredible for a guy like me whose back is completely jacked up. I can't go heavy anymore because of the inflammation response.
Yeah.
But this is a way for me to move like 5-10 pounds of weight, but it feels like I'm going way heavier. So I love it.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. Wow. So you talk a lot about overcoming adversity. You talk about anything as achievable. When you look at coaching companies and coaching execs that you work with, how do you help them determine that determination, or how do you help them get that determination and grit? And how is that similar to what you all went through as a Navy SEAL and as you developed in the SEAL teams?
Well, my feeling is inside businesses, inside organizations, you really want very strong and powerful, effective project teams. And a project team is usually project teams are in that like 6 to 12 type people. And I think of boat crews of when we were going through BUDS, and the idea that with a few like-minded individuals going after the same goal, it's amazing what you can achieve when you're all rowing together, when you're all doing things together. So I like to take a lot of the things I learned in the military and apply them directly to organizations and business, because I so much of it cross-pollinates well. It's just it's all about people.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about relationships based on trust. And when you have trusted relationships inside small project teams of like-minded individuals going after a similar goal, you can freaking crush it. There's so much you can do. So I like to talk about that kind of stuff. And I'll tell like little bud stories and things like that. That's basic underwater demolition school. Because, I spent a lot of time in the teams. That's kind of what majority of my adult life was doing that. So I like to apply a lot of things to it.
How do you get the outliers though? How do you really, the one or two people that are maybe on the team that just don't seem to want to buy in? How do you help them understand that they got to develop some grit and get some skin in the game to be part of that team?
Well, two things. A lot of things in the Navy I had to learn the hard way. I always felt like everybody could get it done. And every once in a while, you'll come across somebody on your small team that no matter what you do, isn't going to be a good fit. And, I'm not saying you got to fire them, but I'm saying there's probably other places inside the organization where they might be a better fit. So that's one. But the amount of times I had to do that during my career, I could count on one hand. But there's people like that. There's people that no matter what you do, you're just not going to be able to get them where you need to be, where you need them to be. The majority of the time, what I found, and a lot of people would argue with me on this, but I kind of my leadership style was much more of something I learned once I went into the teams, which is that the more you empower your junior members of the team, the more they buy into whatever it is that team is going after.
Mm.
So empowering junior people. A lot of times these guys that are pushing back in a lot of ways, a lot of times they feel like they're being marginalized. And if I'm on a small organization, I feel like I'm being marginalized. Hey, I'm just going to give you the bare minimum. And that's what a lot of people do. But when you give those, and they're usually like junior members in an organization, when you give them the reins to some degree and you let them have ownership of something, and you might, as the senior leader, you might know that the direction they're going, God, it's going to be painful, or that piece of this project's probably going to fail. I've seen this before. But if you let them own it, and then let's say it fails to some degree, instead of losing your cool about that, now that's become a teachable moment. And the person who was given the reins and given the autonomy to do A, B, or C on your team, if they screwed it up, then there's, we call it an AAR, an after action review, a hot wash, right after some mission or something, we'd all get together and everybody's got to have thick skin, and you kind of go back and forth. Hey, what could we have done better? Mm-hmm. And in that case, that person is like, hey, look, I wasn't sure if it was going to work. Part of me thought it might not, and it didn't. Did you learn anything? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I learned that. So I before I went to Buds, I was in this quick story. I was on this ship, a smaller ship. We used to call them junk boats in the Navy. So an ARS, Auxiliary Rescue Salvage Boat. And it was USS Safeguard out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And I was a dive officer. I was damage control assistant. I was a food service officer. Later on, I was a supply officer. I did all the shit on the boat. But one of the things all the junior officers did is they were officers of the deck, or OODs. OODs drive the ship. They're responsible for the piloting of the ship. Mm-hmm. And I remember this one CO I had, when every time we'd be pulling into the pier, he'd be right behind me on the bridge wing. And I'd be like, hey, starboard bow thruster 50%. He'd be like, hey, John, let's bring that down to 30%. Roger, sir. Starboard bow thruster 30%. Port forward 1/3, starboard back 2/3. Whatever. All these orders, but he was always correcting me, right? So then that guy leaves, and I would pull it alongside, and everything would be fine, no worries. So then he leaves. New commanding officer comes, and my very first underway with him, my very first docking with him, I'm the OD. And he's standing behind me, bridge wing, same. And we're pulling in San Francisco, California, and it's windy, and it's a little sketchy because, big ship, or, it's like the sails on the side. It acts like a sail, and we had wind blowing us in. And so I was working the bow thruster. I was working with a twin screw ship, and we're pulling in, and I hear screaming over the radio. And it's our master diver back on the fantail. And I look back, and the fantail is swinging fast, swinging into the pier. And it's too late. No matter what I do at that point, I'm doing everything I can to reverse it. I'm giving all the orders to fix it. It's too late, man. Fantail hits the pier, and those big telephone poles along any shipping pier, those things start snapping like toothpicks and flying all over the place. You hear a little like they're almost like little explosions as you hear each of the phone poles cracking and breaking. We finally get it all figured out, all lines over, shut down, and I'll never forget the guy's name, Pete Webb, and I haven't talked to him in decades. But Commander Pete Webb, Lieutenant Commander Pete Webb, he whispers in my ear, and he goes, well, that didn't go real well. I was like, no, sure. And he goes, well, nobody's hurt, no harm, no foul, but did you learn anything?
Mm.
I said, oh yeah, I learned I shouldn't have done this. I should have done that. Da, 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 da. And he's like, okay, good. Great learning experience. Let's do it better next time. And he walks away. And that was it. And
Yeah.
I learned more in those 5 minutes of all that crap that went wrong. I learned more in those 5 minutes than I had in the past year and a half on that ship.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm a big advocate and proponent of letting guys fail and learn from their mistakes, almost to the point where you're encouraging. When I say encouraging failure, I don't mean
Yeah.
like, the business goes, that you really screw up. But I mean, there's so many things in any organization every single day where you can give people autonomy and let them run with it.
Yeah.
Let them run with it, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. How much autonomy do you have when you're in the SEAL team? So, as an operator, that's got to be a different shift for you, right? Or not?
Well, I was Air Force Academy, 88 to 92.
Hmm.
I was commissioned as an ensign in the Navy, and that's a whole nother story, going Air Force and Navy.
Yes.
But I was an ensign in the Navy in 92, and I applied to Bud 6 times over the next 3 years, and each time I got denied. And during that time, I was learning to be a hard hat diver. I was going to salvage schools, going to all these different dive schools. Then I showed up on the safeguard, and I did 3 years on the safeguard. So over the course of 4 years, finally, on the seventh attempt, they let me at least try to go to Buds. And so I went to Buds, and that was in 96. So that's 4 years in the Navy before I went into teams.
Hmm.
And then I was in the teams for 2021 and change.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk a lot about determination and grit. We've been talking about that a little bit. In the world of selling, I mean, you're the chief revenue officer. There's a lot of rejection and a lot of no's. And
Yep.
as you're leading sales teams, how do you not preach it, but how do you nurture your teams in determination and grit when there's so many no's and negatives in selling?
Well, first of all, I think the word sales has a negative connotation, especially in the military. When you
Hmm.
when you talk to guys that are getting ready, the word we use is transition out of the military.
Uh,
Um, a lot of guys will tell you, "Hey, I don't want to be in sales," and my perspective on this is everything in life is sales
mhm.
to some degree. And somebody will tell me that, and I'll say, well, let's talk about our last deployment where we were together in, I don't know, Ramadi, Iraq, and we were competing for a mission with other tactical elements on the battlefield. And senior leaders would have to decide who it was that was going to do mission A, B, or C. That's sales.
Mm.
That's sales. And it's sales from the perspective of you're educating people that are going to make the decision on your capabilities. And that's what I do in KAATSU. I don't go and try to sell. I go around and I educate people on what KAATSU is, because most people are just like you, Tim. They don't know what KAATSU is. I
Mhm.
maybe have heard about it. Peter Tia talked about it on a show. What is that? Or this guy talked about it. What is that? And it's like, all right, well, I'll tell you about it. But the true education is let me show you, and let me put it on you, and let you feel it. And then I realized that perspective does not run parallel to all businesses and organizations. But for me and for our team, we don't really do sales.
Mm.
We do education. We educate people on how to get somebody back into fight. So we, how you can get a rapid rehabilitation protocol going on a guy on a sports team or in the military or in the VA or whatever. And I think when you don't think about it as quote unquote, being the used car salesman, and you think whatever it is your organization does, if your goal is to go out and meet people and I hate the Zoom thing. I hate the phone calls and the text, but when I can be face to face, one-on-one over coffee or a meal, and you create that bond, that's sales, creating relationships. And then over time, that relationship, becomes a trusted relationship. And then at some point in the future, there may never be a play with your organization and that person, or there may be a play with that person later on down the road, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll call Do because he does that stuff. And hold on, let me reach out to him. Relationships are sales, education is sales, and presence is sales, and just repetitive presence, keeping relationships. I mean, my Outlook and my Apple contacts thing, there's like 35,000 people in there. And that's not all, obviously not all KAATSU stuff, but when you spend a life in the military, it's a transient lifestyle. So in my case, we would move every 2 years. And during those 2 years, you'd meet hundreds of people. And I always tell guys, man, when you're getting ready to think about getting out of the military, hold on to every single one of those relationships through your contact. And you can do it now easy with social media and everything. But the relationships are so key, and it makes sales easy because, when you have a relationship, like the microsecond Stephen, our CEO, says, hey, John, I'd really like to do some kind of active leadership thing with our KAATSU team. The first thing that's come to my mind is you, Tim, because we have a relationship. We've known each other for a while, and you've never tried to sell it to me, but I know what you do, and I like you, and I trust you. That's sales. So I encourage people to work with me and for me and things like that. I encourage them to build relationships. That's the best kind of sales there is, in my maybe not so humble opinion.
So a lot of the determination and grit really comes down to attitude. What I'm hearing you say, it's really just an attitude. Yeah.
And a good attitude, a good attitude is contagious, but more contagious than a good attitude is a bad attitude. So back to your original point, when you have that bad apple, to me, the worst apple, it has nothing to do about learning the skills that are required to be part of the organization, because you can teach anybody that stuff. But if you have a bad attitude and that's not going to change, you're gone, man. I don't want you anywhere near my team, because that will destroy years and years of work. Somebody with a bad attitude on the team.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. You talk a lot about servant leadership when you work with organizations. We call it steward leadership here at Full Sail. What do you see the hallmarks of steward or servant leadership as being? I mean, if you were to say, hey, servant leadership means these 4 things, what would you think?
That's a good question. I think it kind of gets back to my original point on leadership, and that's empowering the junior and younger people in the organization. It might not technically be servant leadership, but to me, the best way that I can provide leadership to a junior member on the team is, well, let me put it this way. There's a friend of mine in the teams. He's retired now. He's a Medal of Honor recipient. His nickname is Slab. And Slab has a saying, and I use this all the time. And he'll always say, let me make sure I get it right. You might have to edit that part.
Yeah.
I remember now. And something that Slab likes to say is, you're never too junior to have the best idea in the room, and you're never too senior to be wrong. You're never too junior to have the best idea in the room, and you're never too senior to be wrong. And that is so valuable on so many levels. And when you think about servant leadership, when you're coming up as an organization or a project team or whatever it is your business does, you want to empower that junior guy. You want him to know that if he has a good idea, he should not be afraid to share it, because it might be the idea that takes your entire organization to the next level. Mm-hmm. So I love that saying. I actually don't know if that's truly servant leadership or steward leadership, but it's my approach to everything. I want young guys on the team. I want new people on the team to know the reason they're even on the team is because I value their historical perspective and their opinion. Super important.
How do you create that psychologically safe environment then? I mean, just repeating it over and over again, is that the key? Hey, there's no such thing as a small idea, or your opinion counts. I was captivated by the admitting your mistake. I used to work for a retired 3-star general that had some great ideas, and he thought some of his implementation plans were maybe easier than they turned out to be. And I'll never forget him standing before our field staff team and saying, "Guys, I'm really sorry. I beat you a lot about getting the word out about this product. It's not as easy as I thought." And I'm like, wow, that was really amazing to be able to admit
a mistake. Yeah, that's a great way to do it, I think.
Yeah.
Another, this whole delegate till it hurts, right? That's another way that you can get after that. There's certain things that we all do, and some of us can do it in our sleep, and we know it's going to be done right every time if we do it. But if you have people working for you, if you're a senior leader at an organization, you should not be worried about these. I call it the down and in. You have your up and out. That's your strategic view on whatever it is your organization does. And then you have your tactics, your operational elements and your tactical elements. That's the down and in. If there's things that you are doing that are down and in, you should not be doing them anymore. You want to delegate those, even if you think they're complex tasks and somebody else is going to do them wrong. Delegate that stuff, because for your organization to truly thrive, you gotta, especially if you're a senior leader, if you're the CEO of a company, you gotta be looking up and out all the time, because the competition is always at your heels. So it's important to have people that are willing to lean forward a little bit, but it's more important for you as the leader to let them lean forward, even if it means a couple failures along the way, because you don't have the time, or in my opinion, you shouldn't have the time to be doing all that tactical stuff. Leave that to your team. And then when we hear all the time, leadership by example. When you do that, people see that. If you're a leader on a team, you're living in a fishbowl. There's nothing gets by your organization when you're making these decisions. So people will see you do that. And now senior managers and middle managers and all throughout the organization, they'll start doing the same thing. And that to me is how you empower the most junior guys in the organization. And when the guy, and maybe this is an extreme example, but I know somebody that runs a company right here in Clearwater, and he does this, and he's a retired military 1-star, or maybe he made it as 2-star. I can't remember. But the guy that does the janitorial work in their building, He's a shareholder. Everybody that spent more than a year at his organization, they now small, but he's still a shareholder and he has a voice and he's encouraged to use that voice, even though what he does is janitorial work. There's things that have been changed when you walk into their front office at a Navy command. We would call it the quarterdeck, and they're all his ideas. So he loves working there because every time he walks in through the front door, stuff that he came up with that's been implemented is there. And so everybody on Rob's team feels like they're part of the solution.
You think that helps break down silos as well? When you're talking about that, when you were doing that down and in, I was thinking about, almost look like a silo, and you hear about organizations that are siloed. Do you think that helps with that, break down silos?
I think it can. But I also understand that at some of these bigger, DOD, Department of Defense, that's a massive bureaucracy, and there's thousands and thousands of silos. So I realize that, some of those you're not going to ever break down. But as you break the military down into the services, and then you break all the services down into special operations components, and then you break the components down in our world into the Naval Special Warfare groups, and then each of the groups are broken down into teams, and then each of the teams are broken down into platoons, and each of the platoons down into, see, it goes all the way down to 2-man fire teams. So, are you going to be able to break through silos between the Marine Corps and the Air Force? Probably not. But can you break through silos between maybe this platoon and this platoon that both fall under the same task unit under a SEAL team? Absolutely, because there's so much crossover between those similar organizations. But if Tim, you're talking about silos in a big organization that simply don't talk to each other, that's a hard problem set for sure. But I think it starts at the top. I think if the CEO of that company wants to break down silos, there's definitely ways they can do that.
Yeah. When we're talking about servant leadership, I had another SEAL tell me one time, our mantra is the team, my swim buddy, and me. That's the priority order. Does that help establish that servant leadership in the teams?
Yeah, I think it does. And I know what he's talking about. I've heard different variations of that. The idea that you go on a big training exercise as a full squadron or as a full team out doing something, and then you come back and you've got to do the maintenance on the gear. The last gear, and you learn this early on in BUDS, the last gear that you touch is your personal gear or yourself. The first gear you touch is the team gear. And then there's the platoon gear. And then there might be, you might have been doing something with a boat crew. So you take care of the boat crew. Finally, when all that stuff's done, you worry about your personal gear. And not until all that's done do you even worry about yourself. That's why the guys you see, and this is true anywhere in special operations, you'll see guys come back from the mission and they'll just be smelly, grimy, gross, but they're working on all the team gear first, all the platoon gear, and then finally, when they're all done with all that, they'll go take a shower. That's the last thing they do. Does that help down with leadership? Does that help break down silos? I don't know. I think it's in our culture so much is about me, the whole social, it's hard. It's one thing if you grew up in the military and you had this certain approach kind of literally beat into you. But in a business, you can't beat anything into anyone. But what you can do is you can do your best to lead by example.
Mm.
So whatever it is you want your COO to do and your CEO, you do it by example. And people will watch that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you talk a lot about building trust in your presentations. How is trust taught in the SEAL team? And then how do business leaders apply that model?
Well, I don't know if it's really taught. I think trust in a lot of organizations in the teams would be just one example, but trust is earned.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like, the way I like to think about earned trust is once you lose somebody's trust, it's nearly impossible to get it back. So no matter what you're doing, as you build these relationships, when you build these sales relationships, you're building these relationships inside your organization and outside the organization. There's not much more important than that relationship that's built on trust. And when you've earned each other's trust, everything works better. Once you lose somebody's trust, you might as well just stop doing business with them. You know, I just had this example today. Had somebody that, you know, my neighbor and I, big old laurel oak, had to have a ton of it cut down. And this tree company goes to my neighbor and they quote them, you know, between you and your it was a verbal quote, you know, yeah, we could do the whole thing for $3,000. Then they realize, oh, there's another property owner involved, right? So now I invite them on my property. I show them, and all of a sudden that verbal offer of $2,000 to $3,000 has jumped to $4,500. And I'm like, wait a minute, you told them that the maximum amount, you told him the maximum amount was going to be $3,000 for both sides, and now it's $4,500. And they immediately start backpedaling. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot $3,000. I see what you're doing. You're done. I don't trust you. I told the guy that. And he was out. Yeah. So it applies to everything. And it absolutely applies in sales and business and organizations.
Yeah. What are some of the trust barriers in working with KAATSU that you deal with customers?
When I go and visit potential customers, my whole reason of going to visit these people is building a relationship. So that's why, and they probably look at my my KAATSU credit card bill and raise their eyebrows a little bit. But I'm always taking guys to coffee. I'm always taking guys, you know, out for a little meal. Nothing crazy, but that is so important to me. And when I first meet a potential customer, we might only talk about KAATSU for 5 or 10 minutes, but the rest of it is getting to know them.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite admirals I ever worked for, and he ended up becoming a 4-star admiral. But he used to do this thing. Every time he showed up at a command, he would have the admin shop make him 3x5 cards. And on the 3x5 card would be the first and last name of the service member. If they had a spouse, the spouse's name. If they had kids, all the kids' names. Where they went to school, if they went to college. What they've done in the Navy before they showed up at that command. And, you know, you can imagine, you could go into a lot of detail, but he had a 3x5 card on every single person in the command. And I tried doing it. I never was as good as he was, but that is so valuable. It breaks down so many barriers, because when you meet with somebody that you've only met one time and you know their wife's name, you're asking about their kids, and that it totally changes the dynamics. And let's get back to sales, right? When I'm meeting with somebody and I'm asking my buddy, who is now a buddy of mine, Brian, about his wife and their 3 kids, and well, what about that soccer? I thought he was going to play soccer in high school. All that shit matters, because now we're continuing to build that relationship. I love doing it that way. And I thought that was really insightful for that admiral, the way
Yeah,
he used to
yeah,
do that.
yeah. It kind of reminds me of that old saying, people don't know how much you know, or they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right. And that is,
Mm,
Admiral was kind of exhibiting that care for his people. Right. And I think that,
right.
well, I think of the three-star general that I used to work for, he always blew me away of how much he knew about my family, even though I'd see him maybe only 3 times a year because I was a field staff and he was in
Yeah.
the head office. It's like he always asked about my kids and always knew my kids' names. It's like, yeah, there's a guy that really cares about you. That's really cool.
Yeah. It's a great approach, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, for me, it's faith, family, friends. Those are my top three in life. When I'm interacting with somebody
Mhm.
and they're hitting me up on number two and three repeatedly, and even number
Mhm.
one, but that's what makes me tick. And I think a lot of people are like that. Their business and their work is not what makes them tick.
Right. Yeah, spot on. Yeah. Yeah, very cool. One of the other things that I was kind of captivated in learning more from you on, as I look at your website, you talk about helping companies do the little things right. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Leaders determine what the little things are. And I mean, examples maybe from when you were a SEAL, maybe your time in
Yeah.
Fallujah or something like that.
Yeah.
That's very captivating. Do the little things right. Tell me more about that.
Well, so when I first got to the Air Force Academy, I'm a California boy, surfer, skater. I had no idea what I was getting into. So, you get off the bus, they start yelling at you, they cut all your hair off. And right away, you start realizing they have you doing all this little stuff. Like, you can't fold your socks this way. Your socks have to be folded a certain way. You can't lace your shoes this way. You got to lace them that way. You can't make the bed this way. You got to do it. Every single thing you did during your waking hours was details, small details. And it never made sense to me as a cadet. And then I went in the Navy, and same thing. Everything's detail oriented. I get the buds, you can't sharpen your knife like that. You got to sharpen it like this. You got to put the left lace over the right lace on your boots. I'm like, what the hell difference does that make? And so all these little things, and they didn't really make sense to me. And then I did my first combat deployment in Fallujah, and I remember on that deployment we lost a guy, and in the after action review, when something bad happens on an operation, you immediately peel the onion back on everything. What did we miss? What could we have done differently? And in this case, as we peeled the onion back further and further, there were two things, and they were both small things. I don't want to go into the details, but two things were missed. And now one of our teammates is dead. Super extreme example. But I'm telling you, Tim, when I tell versions of that story in front of especially young professionals or college age kids, I really try to emphasize that all these little things that are seemingly insignificant, most of the time it's for a reason. And everything affects everything. And while you don't think doing this little thing, whatever it is a big deal, if I'm running an organization and I can't trust you to do these three little things right, how can I trust you to do this big thing right?
Mhm.
If you can't do the little things right, how can I trust? There's that word again.
Yeah, right.
How can I trust you to do the big things right? So the little stuff matters. It matters a lot.
Yeah. So how do you coach junior people to pay attention to the details?
I think through examples, through stories, especially when people have some historical perspective in the company, or historical perspective from things they've done before in their life. I mean, that's what I do. I talk to guys in our organization all the time. It's like, hey, I already learned that lesson the hard way. Here's a story.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. And I think that kind of stuff resonates with the younger members on the team, or the more new people in the organization. And if it's a newer organization, it doesn't have to be stories from inside that business. It could be stories from anything. Because there's so much in life that you can make parallels to in business. Somebody dying in a combat operation, maybe that's a little extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason when I get up in front of people and I talk, I want the extreme examples, and then I back it off a bit. And then the Q&As are usually pretty fun.
Yeah. All right, so we're getting near the end of our time together, and
what?
This
I thought we were going to go for 2 hours.
That'd be fun. I think I learn a lot from you every time I talk to you, and I'm sure our audience is learning a lot from you today too. But we have a common interest in sailing. That's how we connected when we connected off of Tom Shea's podcast. We teach people that they can experience a lot of great leadership things while they go out sailing, that they can see this teamwork in action, and they can see, there's only one way to wrap a winch. It's clockwise, and little things like that. What do you think business leaders can learn from sailing?
Oh, I would love to take our KAATSU team on one of your leadership trips, because I feel that when you have a small team of like-minded individuals, there's nothing better than getting out in nature or getting outside and doing something together as a small team, collective, working together, relying on each other. You're on a beam reach and you have a sudden shift in wind and everybody's standing in the wrong places, and there's one person in charge and everybody has to do what they're told. There's so much that can be learned from what you're doing out on a boat with the unpredictable nature of the ocean. The unpredictability, to me, the unpredictability of nature is just another way of looking at life, business, whatever you're doing. And when you have a small group of people dealing with unpredictability, and you can do it by teaching them, especially if they've never been sailing before. And I would imagine this is a hoot for you guys. You teach them, hey, if this happens, here's what you do. 1, 2, 3. If this happens, these are what you have to do. If somebody falls overboard, this is what we're all going to do, and how and why. And then when something actually does happen, and it's a man overboard drills are perfect, because it can be dangerous. You can die. You can lose guys so easily out in a windy, choppy scenario. And as soon as you lose eyes on that person, you might not ever find them again.
Yeah.
And when something happens and you're in that environment, and it's guarded and protected to a degree on
We've
a boat.
never lost a person overboard yet. Had anyone go overboard.
But you know what I mean, though.
Yeah.
When you work together as a team on some of these unpredictable things that happen on a boat, and then they get to actually do it and experience it, I think it's incredible. I think it's a great lab, a great leadership lab for especially like a project team or a project management team, or when you get people and they work together every single day, but they don't really know anything about each other, when you get them out doing one of your deals with Full Sail Leadership Academy,
Mm.
you have to learn about people, because there's some exciting times. There's lots of downtime, and there's lots of time to chat and have a beer and whatever. And you learn a lot about each other and what makes each other tick. So yeah, I think your model is
Yeah,
perfect.
thanks. When you're talking about the change, adapting the change and all that stuff, I just keep thinking about how resiliency matters and bouncing back and having that extra bit in the tank to say, okay, we're going to keep going. We're not all stuck or whatever. I never forget a presentation that I saw through Mark Devine's group and Jason Redman talking about getting off the X.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tell us, how does that fit in with resilience, and how do you coach that mindset both to junior SEALs and senior leaders in management?
Well, to me, resiliency by definition, it's the ability to bounce back after maybe something negative happens. And my head automatically goes to the behavioral health, mental health, stress, burnout, all that kind of stuff. When I hear resiliency nowadays, that's what I think of. I think everybody's under a lot of stress. Everybody's having to deal with stress and burnout and behavioral health. There's a lot of issues, especially in the veteran space, but it's everywhere, right? Everybody's stressed out. And a big part of creating resilience on a team, I think it comes back to people. It comes back to relationships that are based on trust, and the idea of when you are struggling, that you feel comfortable leaning on a teammate, or maybe more importantly, when one of your teammates is struggling, he or she feels comfortable to lean on you. And leaning can mean a lot of things. It could be simply just talking to somebody like, hey man, Tim, you look stressed out, man. Is everything okay at home? Something as simple as that can open a dialogue, and you might just get a bunch of crap off your chest, but maybe that's what you needed to get past something. The resilience piece it's really important. Not to get too morbid, but this whole suicide epidemic in our society now, I believe so much of it is kind of like, this idea of a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Because just about anything we're all dealing with, whatever it is, somebody else in your organization's probably dealt with something similar. I mean, there's this great speaker. I used to love listening to him. He's no longer with us, but his name's Jim Rohn. And he used to say all the time, and yeah, that's right. You and I have talked in the past, but he used to say all the time, let's see if I get it right. You can't change the wind, but you can change the set of your sails. Can't change the wind, but you can change the set of your sails. I think what he means by that, back to resilience, is bad stuff happens to everybody. And it's not about what it is that happens to you, but it's how you react to what it is that happened to you. And having trusted teammates in the organization is so important. I think that's why it's valuable to occasionally get out of the office together and go have a meal or go do something,
Mm.
or go to your leadership academy, or go do something where you're building that relationship, because the resilience, collective resilience, it all comes back to behavioral health, mental health, for me.
Yeah.
And if I feel like I have somebody I can talk to on the team, I'm going to leverage that person. But if
Yeah.
everybody's in their own little world or in their own little silos, then that's an issue.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said there. Hey, teammate, you seem a little down. What's going on? We talk to leaders that they really need to get below the waterline to find out what's in the head, heart, and of the people that are on their team.
I like that.
And if they don't do that, they're never going to learn what could run their business aground. That team member has something so stressful going on in their life that all of a sudden they're going to quit the organization because the boss didn't know about it. So I think that's really cool. Talking about water, and we're coming up on the hour here.
Okay.
You're very heavily involved in the UDT Association, the SEAL Foundation. You've got the big Tampa Bay swim coming up in short order. If
Yep.
anyone in our audience is interested in supporting that cause or getting involved in it, how do they do it?
Well, all right. So, quick story. I'm turning on my KAATSU as we
I saw
talk.
that.
So, all right, yeah. All right,
So
there we
now
go.
you're going to have
So
the
now,
big
now,
Popeye on,
now, now I'm actually
finger Popeye
working
on
out.
music.
I'm actually working out while we talk, and I use my
Wow.
hands. But so back in 2010, there was a guy that stepped on a landmine and lost both legs. Dan Knassen. I was at USSOCOM headquarters here in Tampa, and a bunch of us got together. We decided to do something to try and raise some money for Dan and his family, because this, he just anything we could do to help out. And we were expecting to make about $3,000, just kind of reaching out to our friends and family. And at the American Legion, at the party afterwards, and all these checks and these IOUs and these wads of cash, little pile on the table. And I remember we started counting how much money was on the table, and it wasn't 3,000; it was like 30,000. And we're like, "Wow, man, we might really be onto something here." Because my friend or my family member or my sister or whoever said, "Hey, anything you need to help with guys like this, I want to be involved." So that was 14 years ago. And each year that swim has grown to the point now where it raises significant resources for the Navy SEAL Foundation each year. And so that's the Tampa Bay Frogman Swim. That we raise money with that for the Navy SEAL Foundation, specifically for Gold Star families, so surviving spouses and kids whose husbands, dads are no longer with us. What I do on the speaking side is there's another nonprofit that's near and dear to my heart called the UDT SEAL Association.
Okay.
So when I get up and I speak, and people ask me, "Well, what's your speaking fee?" And I'll be like, "Well, it's this if you can afford it, but know that the vast majority of that, I got to pay for travel and stuff. The vast majority of that is going to the UDT SEAL Association, and that's the nonprofit that helps out with my veteran teammates." So this nonprofit world, very unique and different. But I'll tell you, they are all, and I know there's hundreds of nonprofits helping first responders and veterans and all this. But for the people out there that feel like the nonprofit world is a little slippery or whatever, I will tell you, because I've been on the receiving end of this with some stuff in my family. I will tell you that what they're doing is God's work, because there's things that happen that sometimes veterans families just cannot deal with financially, and these nonprofits, they're able to help. So both of those I work very closely with. The UDT SEAL Association, that's my public speaking stuff, and in the Navy SEAL Foundation, that's the Tampa Bay Frogmen Swim. And both those websites, I think you said you put them in the show notes or something.
Put them in the
But
notes.
and then throw the KAATSU website. So here, just to show you real quick. So this hand is doing KAATSU.
Wow.
Not a tourniquet. If that was a tourniquet, it would stay white. But everything in this limb is dilated for 30 seconds and releases. And if I just sit here, see the difference in my hands?
Yeah. Wow.
So if I just sit here and do, I only have it on one arm right now, but I could have this one on the other arm. And if I just sit here and do some movement, it feels like intense exercise. Like I feel like feels like I'm curling 60 pounds right now, but there's nothing in my hands. So very broad brush strokes. That's what KAATSU does. Helps with a lot of physical therapy. A lot of guys with amputations, that whole residual limb discomfort and pain. It helps those guys. But yeah, great company, helping a lot of my wounded teammates and helping with a lot of sports programs as well.
Wow, John, thanks for your time today. This has been an amazing time of learning from you, being inspired by you. Again, John is available. Go to johndoolittle.com and you can check him out, hear more of his pearls of wisdom, and maybe bring him into your organization. I think it'd be time and money well spent. So, John, thanks again for your time. Thank your family for allowing you to take time away, and KAATSU for taking time away from today, and just appreciate it a lot. Thanks.
Awesome. Tim, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.